Hi guys, it's G-Economics here, bringing you figure 10 of A593 GCSE Economics. So this is the latest in the series of videos with regard to the stimulus material for your Unit 3 paper in June. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's get to it. This particular extract is all to do with competitiveness, productivity, supply side policies, and most importantly, and something which I'm going to deal with in a little bit of detail and direct you to some other resources to help you, I hope, is this whole notion of an index value, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you can see that index values or index numbers. So what have we got here on figure 10? We have got a data set, bar chart, which shows us the productivity in the G7 countries. I'm going to talk a lot around this data rather than answering specific questions on it. However, here are a few questions which you may wish to consider as part of your revision. Number one, define the term productivity, output per worker per period of time. Number two, you're given a set of data. It wouldn't be unreasonable for the exam board, to ask you to compare productivity in the UK with that of the other G7 countries. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, the G7, the group of 7 leading nations globally. And nota bene esto, ladies and gentlemen, nota bene, productivity is being measured by way of an index number. And then finally, education is one method of improving an economy's productivity. It's a supply side policy, as you know. Identify and explain how 2 other supply side policies may actually work. And I'll be following this up in the next video with some further detail regarding supply side policies. So, what have we got here? First of all, let's just make the point that I tweeted an article yesterday from the Guardian newspaper all about productivity. UK productivity and the problems with UK productivity being very poor productivity relative to our particularly industrialised nations and our competitors. We do lag behind on the productivity stakes. So this is very much on topic, ladies and gentlemen, as I have said here. Now, why would an economy want to produce productivity gains and productivity improvements, ladies and gentlemen? Well, let's think about this in terms of aggregate supply and production possibility frontier diagrams. If an economy can bring about improvements in its productivity, in other words, you get your resources to produce more in their 9-to-5 day than they did the week previously. That's basically what productivity is, productivity improvements. Now, what will that do? That will lower your costs of production because you're able to produce more with the same amount of resources, land, labour, capital, enterprise, and hence your costs of production fall. By way of a diagrammatic analysis of that, that means that your aggregate supply curve is shifting downwards and to the right. So AS1 is shifting to AS2. Now, why is that beneficial, ladies and gentlemen? Well, to see why it's beneficial, we need to then add we need to add an aggregate demand curve to this diagram. So let's add an aggregate demand curve, and let's now analyse this to see what's happened as a consequence of, in this instance, productivity improvements. So we can see that the price level drops from P1, initial equilibrium, to P2, final equilibrium. So our direction of travel here, ladies and gentlemen, is in a downwards direction. And we can see that real output, in other words, the size of the economy is growing from Y1 to Y2. So we can already see gains here, ladies and gentlemen, as we move from equilibrium point A to equilibrium point B. We can see gains in the fact that our economy is growing. If we have a growing economy, we may therefore need to employ more people. If more people are in employment, more people have money to spend. More people spending money then adds to the what we would describe as the circular flow of income in the economy, or the size of the economy, and so the whole process repeats itself, and you'll know that to be called the multiplier process. And also, ladies and gentlemen, look what's happening here. Price level is falling from P1 to P2. So that makes our economy and the goods and services coming out of our economy more price competitive. So we in the UK would become more internationally price competitive. And if countries, and nota bene esto, ladies and gentlemen, if countries were making their purchasing decisions purely on price decisions, which of course is not always the case because they look at quality and so on and so forth, but if it was purely on a price decision, then we are more internationally competitive, therefore we're more likely to sell more goods and services. So this is the reason why productivity gains are so important to an economy. Also think of it in terms of the productive capacity or the size of your economy. As AS, aggregate supply, the total supply of goods and services in your economy shifts to the right, that really is the same as saying that the PPF curve shifts outwards from PPF1 to PPF2, that movement from there to there. And you, of course, will be familiar with that as being known as economic growth. So productivity improvements, productivity gains can bring us these so much desired and sought after improvements in our economic growth and in an economy's economic growth. So this is why it's so important, ladies and gentlemen. Let's now then consider this data set, which provides us with data, and as I've said, this is in index numbers. So we've got the group of 7 leading nations here. Now you can see that it says that the UK has a value of 100. Now that's a bit of an odd measure, isn't it, for productivity? What is that, 100 what? 100 widgets, 100 pounds, what is it? But you don't really need to concern yourself with what it is. You just need to know that this means that the UK is what we refer to in index numbers as the base, or the point from which the comparisons are being made. Now, I've talked about this in quite some detail in a previous video, ladies and gentlemen, if you just give me the liberty of showing you. So I've done another video, it's one of my more popular ones actually, it's sort of 8,500 views on this one. So if you have a little search for index numbers and have a little look at that one, there's 7 minutes worth there, ladies and gentlemen, of interpretation and explanation of index numbers. So I'm going to go through a fairly basic explanation in this video. If you want more detail, I recommend you go here. So, if we are making comparisons from the base year, ladies and gentlemen, here's an example of how this works. So if we said country A is the base, the point from which the comparisons are being made, the base year country, or the base year, whatever it may be, always has a value of 100. And then the others are measuring percentage changes, ladies and gentlemen, and this is the key thing, percentage changes from this initial start point, this comparator. So if we look at this particular example, where we might have, say, 3 countries, and this is we're making comparisons about their GDP or GDP growth or whatever it may be, we could say that the comparison to be made between country A and country B here is that country B's, given that it's 120, that would mean that country B's, if we're saying its GDP is 20% higher than country A's. If we were making a comparison between country A and country C, we would be saying that country C's, small c here, you can see for a reduction, is 10% lower than country A's. Okay? Now what we can't say here, ladies and gentlemen, and I go into this in more detail in my other video if you'd like to look at that, but what we can't say necessarily is that the difference between B and A is 30%, and the reason that we can't say that is because the comparisons are being made from a start point of country A. And so these values for B and C are expressed as percentages from A, not from one another. So you need to be careful on that, and I'll explain a little bit about that when we look at this data in our data set. So we've got these countries. So we can say, for example, Canadian productivity is 4% higher than the UK. We can say that Italy's productivity is 10% higher than the UK's. Now what we can't say, ladies and gentlemen, is that the difference between Canada's and Italy's is 6%. Now the reason that we can't simply take one from another is because that neither of these are the base year country which has the value of 100. This is the point from which all the comparisons are made, so do be very careful on that. And we can say that Japan's, and I believe it does express this in the text above, Japan's is 16% less productive than the UK. But everywhere else is more productive, and as you would expect, Germany here, 36%, you know, Germany, the powerhouse, the driving force behind the Eurozone area, and 36% more productive than the UK, more productive than the UK. Okay, so that's how we interpret that data, ladies and gentlemen. Now, what problems, I think it's important to consider what the problems might be if we have increasing demand in the economy but not being matched by increased productivity gains. Very important, ladies and gentlemen. This would mean that AD, aggregate demand, might be shifting very rapidly to the right. And as you know, ladies and gents, if AD shifts very rapidly to the right, so we start from P1 and Y1, that will bring inflationary pressures into the economy. Inflationary pressures build. So we'd be moving from A to B to C to D and so on. Point A, equilibrium B, C and D. So it'd be having what we would describe there, ladies and gentlemen, as demand pull inflationary pressures in the economy. Now, one way in which you can help to ameliorate and to alleviate that is to try to get AS and AD moving in tandem with one another. So as AD shifts, offset that and counterbalance that by a shift in AS. So AS shifts in this direction. So for example, if we took this second AD curve, AD2, rather than going from A to B, we might then end up simply going from A to C. Now that's a much more satisfactory state of affairs because, first of all, we've seen greater economic growth rather than going from A to B, it's now A to C. But also, we are maintaining our international price competitiveness because we can see that this is pretty much on a par with our original start point price level of P1. So it's very important to try and get AS shifting in tandem with AD. And one way that we can do this is through productivity enhancements and gains, through improvements in technology, through a more educated workforce, through maybe extending, making your workers work harder, by paying them maybe efficiency wages, so that efficiency wage theory whereby workers will work harder because you pay them a little bit more. All of these things can help to shift AS in tandem with AD. Now if you don't do that, then you'll end up going maybe, worst case scenario, ladies and gents here, price level rises all the way up to PD, or P4, whatever it might be. And that makes you very internationally uncompetitive. There's a lack of international competitiveness there. And so you'll be familiar then with the term supply side policies, getting AS to shift to the right in conjunction and in tandem with AD. Now there are numerous supply side policies listed in your textbook, and if you think about them, you could write probably 20 supply side policies. I mentioned one there to you, efficiency wages, paying people a bit more than the equilibrium to incentivize them to work harder, reducing corporation tax, privatization, deregulation, infrastructure projects, education, training, childcare facilities free at the point of access. There are so many, ladies and gentlemen. Make sure that you can identify them and explain them. But also, let's not forget that there are problems associated with them, and this is why, ladies and gentlemen, it's so difficult to get AS to shift in tandem with AD. Number one, cost. Think about, for example, the building of the new high-speed rail link in the UK and the enormous billions of pounds worth, tens of billions, maybe running into hundreds of billions of pounds worth of cost. Think about, for example, I was listening to Mike Parry on TalkSport yesterday. Mike Parry, Tip Top, and they were talking about the building of the Scottish Parliament buildings at Holyrood. Now that building was projected initially to cost 40 million. In the end it cost 400 million pounds. It's the most overpriced sort of public sector project in the world, I think. Went from 40 billion to 400. Maybe not billion, million, it's probably more like it. 40 million to 400 million. But a vast sum of money, indeed. Think about the time it takes. High-speed rail, we're talking decades away before we get anywhere near seeing this. Think about how long it takes to train a new doctor, highly qualified doctor, to become maybe a consultant. You're talking maybe 15 to 20 years there. And those of you might have touched upon this, certainly at A-level economics we consider cost-benefit analysis. So the whole process of evaluating whether or not it's worthwhile to build high-speed rail, we've got to look at all of the costs and benefits associated with that, some of which are very difficult to ascertain. So for example, how do you put a value on the wildlife that you will decimate as you build your high-speed railway straight through greenfield sites potentially? And how do you put a value on the enormous disruption that will be caused to local people in terms of time? You know, think the roadworks in Newcastle at the moment are horrendous, and you think of large road haulage companies, Eddie Stobart for example, trying to transport goods and services, goods around the country. Well, think of the enormous time investment for them in terms of time lost because they're sitting in traffic jams, and hence the increased cost to the company. How do you put values on all of these things? That's all to do with cost-benefit analysis. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, those are my thoughts on figure, what is this one we're doing? Figure 10. I'll leave it there and I'll be back shortly with figure 11. Bye for now.